Hi, I'm KS Garner, and you're listening to the Solo Nerd Podcast. Today, I'll be speaking with the showrunner and dungeon master of the Tales of Adventure Agents of B.O.O TTRPG podcast, Ashawn Jackson, aka Dapper Wombat. Welcome, Ashawn.
Hey, everybody. Hey, it's nice to meet you, Gardner. It's nice to be here.
Well, thank you for reaching out. I appreciate you for coming on to the show today. But outside my introduction, who is Ashawn Jackson in his own words?
A multitude of different wonderful things. No, I mean, I sure am just some random dude who decided to do a podcast because he needed some sort of escape from doing chemotherapy treatments. I guess slowly learning that like life is just gonna be okay.
So what is Agents of B.O.O or Agents of B.O.O TTRPG about?
So Agents of B.O.O, because B.O.O is a not a moniker, but shortened for
acronym.
The Bureau. Thank you. It's an acronym for Bureau of Occultic Observations, and essentially, Agents of B.O.O is it's an actual play TTRPG podcast, but instead of the traditional role of the players being adventurers, they are essentially secret agents for the Bureau of Occultic Observations, and they kind of get sent on different missions. So, they're almost kind of like a mix between like secret agents and monster hunters.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of came about me just kind of taking a bunch of random like nerd culture stuff together, and how I can best describe it to people is that it's basically a mixture between Men in Black meets The Witcher with a heavy dash of Hellboy thrown into the mix.
Oh wow.
Because it
sounds really fun.
Yeah, I mean, like it's been great, especially like the team that I have, like everybody's super awesome. Like for Men in Black is because they have like this really cool high-tech magitech weaponry. The Witcher because they're like augmented, secret agents, and Hellboy because you have a lot of those like folklore monsters thrown in. But ultimately it's a great time. We are currently through our we're going to be releasing a newish arc for season 1 starting next week. So that's going to be a lot of fun, and we just have a lot more things planned for or as we kind of go along for season 1, and hopefully we get popular enough to do this for, I think I have it planned out for 5 more seasons, but we'll have to see how far we get with that.
Like I'm kind of, well, the game is on hiatus right now, but I was in something similar to this like earlier in the winter. And my character is like sort of like a ranger type of character because they kind of needed one of those, especially our team was like not hunting but like investigating fae activity. In a way. And my character, I just make like the most reckless and dumbest decisions. Like, I know you're not supposed to split the party, and I know you're not supposed to be touching stuff, and I know you're not supposed to,
but I'm gonna do it anyway.
Yeah, I know you're not supposed to talk to any fae like people or accept anything from them because
never
but
give them your name.
Yeah, but I just thought it was like the funnest things. And the thing is, my reckless decisions moved the narrative forward because they wanted to like go into the library and do research and this, that, and the third. I'm like, my character is not going to sit around and wait for this stuff to happen. Like, intelligence is my dump stat. So
yes,
we gotta go. And I just did the dumbest stuff, and like I say, it just moves the story forward, which our game master, who I've also played with before, really appreciates. It's just like we're kind of stuck in a way. We're stuck we're in the library. We need to go out and like mix and mingle with the people. Yeah, it was bad, but I almost died like twice, but it was fun.
I mean, but you almost died. That means you technically did, and so I say it's a win-win, right? And
yeah,
that's always the thing. Like, that's why I wanted for Agents of Boo to have some points where, like, no, like, you all need to do some sort of investigation on like what you guys are going to be dealing with, because like, yeah, I do tend to run combat a little bit deadlier, but then also in other veins it's just like, nah, y'all don't get any time, y'all have to go and like react to this right now, and it's just kind of trying to find that nice balance between the two, and just being like, there's a time where you can plan, and then there's a time for action.
Yeah, there was one scene where I was investigating some like fake drugs, and like I found it, but I was away from the party. So do I go all the way back and then come back later? I was like, no, I'm here already. And then I ended up getting caught. And then when I ended up getting caught, I was like, oh, is this the bathroom? I'm looking for the bathroom. Sorry. They didn't fall for that. Obviously they didn't, but
obviously.
Yeah, it was fun. It was really, really fun.
That sounds awesome.
But Ashawn, could you elaborate on your creative process for Agents of Boo as a whole? So I guess outlining, okay, so you're thinking of this game that you want to run, right? So then how did you like outline it? How did you choose the people that you want to play with, creating encounters, difficulties, maps, so on and so forth? Like, this is definitely a question for me because I'm running my own game right now with some of my family members, and I'm like, just some of it I planned out, and some of it is like they went somewhere they wasn't supposed to because they're not high enough level, and like they're mad at me because they're about to die. I was like, you're not supposed to be here, and I'm trying to get you to go away from it, but you keep going towards it. So it's like, how do you like just your process on how do you came up with this game and how you're going through it currently?
Yeah, so I will definitely say that at the very least for the Agents of Boo that we have now episodes as regularly as, for this year, this is actually, technically speaking, this is the third attempt that I've gotten Agents of Boo off of the ground. So I guess kind of like getting into the process and I kind of getting into the background, kind of like what I talked about earlier. I really wanted to do this because I was very inspired by, like shows like The Adventure Zone or like Not Another D&D podcast, listening or also like watching to Critical Role. And about 3 years ago, I got really, really sick and I had to go through chemotherapy for it. And I was just like, well, I was unsure of how my health was going to be, in the next coming years. And I was like, well, what do I want to do that's fun? And, I looked to D&D, like D&D or like TTRPGs in general. That gave me a sense of like purpose and just kind of like something I could do to forget my troubles for a bit. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to start a podcast. And even if it isn't successful, I can say that I did it. And essentially, I just grabbed a couple of my friends, in particular, my two best friends, Jared and David. They have been with me since college, which, boy, howdy, I think that's maybe about 9 or 10 years now. Actually, no. No, I think I am right. Wow, that is a long time. Maybe about 6. But I got them into D&D because they didn't really see like what the appeal was. And so I got them. And because my buddy Jared is an indie wrestler, he had some of his wrestling buddies as well. And so we ran it for the first time like that. It was fine. We only made it through one season because at that point we were all broke. We didn't know what we were doing. So we couldn't get schedules aligned. We couldn't find any funding and everything. And so that just kind of died off. Second time, didn't even get off the ground. Third time, I essentially just kind of grabbed friends who I thought would be a good fit. I think for me, it was making sure that everybody had some sort of cohesion. And especially because of how I wanted to emphasize of how modernized, but also how still incredibly dangerous that this world is. You all are going to need to work together because like none of y'all can run in by yourself and like think that you can like stop a horde of goblins or whatever. It's like no, like y'all get stopped. Their guns exist in this world. And I honestly, like, I think it just kind of happened as just very lucky happenstance that everybody just gelled very well together. Everybody just like was on the same wavelength, and I'm just very fortunate to have that sort of just happen in general. And so once I assembled my team, I'm like, all right, cool. So what do I want to do for this podcast? I know I want to do Agents of Boo again, but like my whole creative process was like, I kind of looked around at all of the other podcasts that I saw, and not to throw any shade on anybody who works hard for their podcast, I just was really tired of seeing a lot of the like traditional medieval fantasies,
I don't
castles
like
and elves and kings, and I'm like, that's cool and all, but like I wanted to do something more. And one of the three loves, or like the three worlds that I fell in love with, was the Eberron setting for D&D, was the Iron Kingdom setting for Privateer Press, and I think also for Pathfinder. And lastly, was Shadowrun, because Shadowrun is basically Magitech and cyberpunk and different like cool urban fantasy shit. And I was like, you know what? I wanted to do something unique with this, so I wanted to do that. And especially it makes sense considering I'm playing more of that like Men in Black, Hellboy aesthetic, because those are supposed to take place in a much more modern time. So I know I wanted to do something unique, and I wanted to do something that would kind of help, even if it isn't growing now, just kind of help it stand out from the rest, so to speak. To your point about kind of like getting directions and everything, and like with making sure that people stay on track and like kind of going where you're going, I saw a Twitter post earlier today that was kind of talking about that as well. And honestly, that has happened many more times than I can count, just kind of recording the podcast. But I still think those are still my favorite moments, because at some point or another, your players, what you have planned as a dungeon master or a game master, and what you have and what your players have planned are essentially just like night and day, right? Like once the players, or you could be surprised, like the players put all of their brain cells, put the one brain cell to work, and they instantly know exactly what to do. And the best thing for that is, just kind of rolling with the punches, especially like if they're in an area where you don't think that they're supposed to be, then you either have, not want to say some either barrier of entry, but like, I guess kind of give an example. If they do die, that's not necessarily the end, because that also just brings up these different avenues for, maybe what the campaign might look like. It's the state of like improv comedy where it's just yes and I think for just doing that and just kind of being flexible with that is very, very hard to do, especially because you're like, man, I took 3 hours to write this section, like I had all of the details correct, and you all looked at it for like 15 minutes and were like, nope, we're going to like go get ice cream and go to the library. And it's like, well, fine. So it's just stuff like that. Players are going to be players. Dungeon masters are going to be dungeon masters. It's more about, even if they don't get all of the full information from what you have planned, sometimes it is just best to kind of sprinkle it out throughout. So even if they do go somewhere that they're not supposed to, maybe you could give them like a little bit of the story plot here, or hey, maybe even there's like a little bit of extra lore that you can drop there, just to kind of give the players a chance to just go and interact with the world, because that's ultimately what they just really want to do.
Yeah, I try to get them to do that, but I think that just because they're all of them have almost died at some point.
Mm-hmm.
They're like scared. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do this to you.
Mm-hmm.
Either you made this decision or your dice did this.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do this to
Mm-hmm.
you.
And they're so
So it's
scared that they don't want to
I
do
think it's
anything
just,
anymore. Yep.
yeah, I think it's that part, and then learning how to play with each other because they've never
Mm-hmm.
played with each other before, even though we are a family.
Yeah.
So maybe another couple of sessions, I'll see what I can do to get them to be more of a team.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're like halfway through the game, so if they don't get it within the next couple of sessions, I don't know what to tell them. I guess I'll just have to kill them all.
I mean, yeah, but like that's also the unfortunate thing too, right? Like if it doesn't matter how many times you as a game master be like, hey, you guys need to figure this shit out. If they don't figure it out, that's really not. They can blame you all they want, but like that's really not on you, because you gave them a chance, you gave them an incentive to do so. So at that point, like that's out of your hands. Like I said, there are just some instances where like parties do have really good cohesion and sometimes they just really don't. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. I would say, I guess if it's just kind of like, if you would allow me to throw my 2 cents into the hat,
yeah,
I would say sometimes it's really good to just kind of have things grow organically.
mm-hmm.
Because over time they either will essentially kind of get it or they don't. And I think it's a matter of just kind of having more of a 80% organic. So you're kind of like watching and observing, kind of seeing how things go. And then the other 20% is kind of like pointing out what people's strengths are and
mm-hmm.
how you think that you can incorporate different characters, like different party members and how they can, essentially start working together.
Yeah, I normally do that with my NPCs of trying to get them in there, to mix them in there and use them as a resource. I feel like a lot of them don't use the environment that they have in the NPCs as their resources in a way. And they also try to like get me to tell them how stuff is supposed to be, like who they can trust or who is lying. And that's like you have to make the roll for it. I can't tell you everything. You have to figure it out.
Like, who do we gotta trust? I don't know. Who do you have to trust?
Exactly. I'm like, they hate that when I shrug my shoulders. Look, I don't know. Do you want to go in there and into the dark and figure out? Because all of them decided to be humans, which is stupid. So they don't have dark vision.
Oh, the poor bastards.
Poor things. But so how has it been creating this podcast, this like TTRPG podcast, and I guess being just another podcast in a litany of other TTRPG podcasts, that's out there now. And then you got the Adventure Zone, and then you have Critical Role. Those are the two that I listen to or watch. So how's it been like navigating through this whole like explosion of D&D shows now?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I think that's also a question that I really struggle with a lot, just as an independent, as like an independent podcast creator. Sure, like I have the strength of my team, and like they kind of help me motivate. They help motivate me and get through a lot of the other stuff. But man, like there are some instances where I just have like depressive spirals about that, thinking like, well, was this a stupid mistake? Is this just a super oversaturated market? Is this never going to see the light? And then my brain kind of kicks in, and after I kind of like calm down, like go get some water or something, I realize that's like, what, we may or may not be at the level that is Critical Role or the Adventure Zone or Dimension 20 or Not Another D&D Podcast or Tales from Magic Tavern or Dungeons and Daddies, not a BDSM podcast, or any of the other wonderful examples of how of essentially just storytelling with dice. But that doesn't mean that we aren't doing something. You know, that doesn't necessarily mean that we aren't making any progress. And that also means that we also just don't need to compete in those sorts of fields, right? Like, don't get me wrong, Critical Role is amazing, and they've been doing this for about 7 years now.
Like 7 to 8 years, yeah.
Yeah. But like, let's call a spade a spade. Not only do they have like all of this amazing breadth of skill behind all of them, they all have been friends for, I think before Critical Role happened, they were all friends for like a good couple years, because Critical Role, I think, started, or the idea of it started when Liam O'Brien wanted to do a one shot for his birthday, and they all just kind of played beforehand.
Yeah.
But then also, like, they had enough of a platform to do so. Once again, I don't want to like say that, oh, they didn't work hard to get where they were, and, you know, I'm just because no, I have absolutely mad respect for everybody involved, especially like for, oh shit, sorry.
It's fine.
Oh, I thought I had to sneeze.
You're good.
And I have a lot of mad respect for everybody on the team. But like, Marisha Ray sure was the executive, I think it was the executive creator for Geek and Sundry at the time. And even then, I'm pretty sure, Ed, please do not quote me on this. I know people are going to get angry at me. Do not quote me on this. This is just under my assumption. But like, they sure were friends with like the folks at Geek and Sundry. Sure, they were still trying to figure out how Critical Role was supposed to come to be and how it was supposed to look. But they already had a lot of this wonderful stuff that they built under the surface already in play. And it just kind of, again, struck like basically lightning in a bottle. So even at that point, it's like, you know, we don't really need to, I would love to be able to meet everybody like that and be able to get into the like high profile D&D cool kids club. But, you know, like there's obviously a lot more that I have to learn, and obviously there has to just be more growth involved. And, you know, whether or not getting at that level is not only comfortable just for myself, but everybody else involved. Because, you know, even though I'm the showrunner, we are all still a team. And you're making sure that we all still stay a team and just kind of figure out what we all want to do as a team. So that's going to be a more roundabout soapboxy way of me just being like, oh, well, don't compare yourself to others, which again sounds very hypocritical because I do that on like a daily basis. That is just, I guess, the creator's curse. But sometimes, and especially in this space of like sometimes of Dungeons and Dragons or TTRPG podcast or just TTRPGs in general, sometimes the best thing that you can do is just create something. Regardless if it is something that you think is trash, something that nobody will listen to. If you just start creating something, eventually there are going to be people who notice. Or if you find out, hey, this isn't exactly what I wanted to do, or hey, this is something I wanted to do, let me keep creating on this more. Sometimes it's okay, or most of the time it's okay to fail as long as you learn from your failures to grow. And more importantly, more often than not, 95% of the time, it is okay to create something for the sake of just creation, right? And I think that's especially imperative with how our modern society and how late stage capitalism with everything going on, because we are now so focused on, you know, we have our job, but we also got our like hustle, you know, on the end, you know, like I gotta stay on my grind 24/7. And we often just forget that, like, no, sometimes it's just okay to just create something and not gain any semblance of like any monetary value. And I think that's also very powerful because, again, like I knew I wanted to do something with this podcast, but again, ultimately doing this podcast and just coming up with the ideas for all of this was essentially a tool that I used to help me get through that very dark moment in my life where I didn't know if one move in the hospital or like one visit to an ER hospital bed later, I'm gone, and that's it. And more often than not, I think that's something that a lot of people tend to forget. Yeah. So sometimes, I mean, it's going to be hard, especially because like being independent and Lord knows, like trying to run all of this stuff and trying to use all of your own money to run all of this stuff. It's hard. It is the hardest, or I can't say it's the hardest thing, but it is so draining. It's so taxing.
Yeah.
You're waking up sometimes in the middle of the night thinking that like, oh God, this was a mistake. You know, you're crying, trying to figure out like, why isn't this working? You know, you get upset because like all of the data that you had for a couple of episodes is gone. And yet, just like when you hear people giving you feedback on your podcast, or you see, you know, just surprisingly some of your views for your podcast go up, there is that real sense of accomplishment. It's almost like a farmer, or like, you know, essentially somebody growing their own vegetables. Growing vegetables and making sure plants stay alive sounds easy on paper, but it's very hard work. And, you know, some plants can be fickle. But when it comes time to harvest, and when you dig your hands into the soil and finally pick those tomatoes that you were caring for, they are the absolute best tomatoes, bar none, anywhere from the rest of the world. And the reason why is because you put the time in and you chose to care. Even if you didn't know if you were going to be able to sell these amazing, you know, tomatoes, you still put in the time and you still put in the time to care. And that's why it makes everything worthwhile.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. Pretty much with everything.
Yeah.
But throughout this whole process, do you or did you ever get overwhelmed? So like, does it ever become too much? As you were saying before, like sometimes, you know, you wake up in the middle of the night and it be, you know, the anxiety becomes too much maybe. Like, how do you typically manage your mental well-being? I guess when not even with just the podcast itself, just that's one thing, but like with your life in general, you know, just you and, you know, you may have a job on the side and then, you know, friends, family, pets, bills. Like, how do you manage your mental well-being when it does become too much?
That is a great question. I don't think that's a question that a lot of people like actually stop and think about and ask. So I want to say first and foremost, thank you, because that is actually a really great question. I guess to kind of follow up before I answer this really awesome question. Yes, all of the time I am in a constant state of screaming, making sure that my podcast and my life doesn't suddenly and magically go up in flames. I have never feared something as much before as if realizing after playing a really awesome like 3-hour session, only to realize that the backup recording that we had got damaged somehow and we had to wait a whole month to get it replaced.
I had my hard drive go up on me one time, and it had my recordings on there. So I was like, oh, I don't have anything anymore. So I had to start all over again. Yeah, that's happened to me.
But I would definitely say, and like I said, I think this kind of goes back to what I experienced medically. I guess to kind of like touch on that a little bit. I don't want to get into full details, but about 3 years ago, around the time of September, I noticed I was starting to have really bad back pain. I went to like physical therapy and everything like that, and didn't seem to work. And going through November and like December, it started getting worse. It was getting really, really hard for me to move. And, I was feeling this tingly sensation from my chest all the way down to my legs. And I remember January, like the first week of January, I was sitting in my bed. Something fell and I reached down to grab it, but I fell out of bed and I couldn't feel where my legs were in space at all. So I couldn't get up. So we went to emergency, urgent aid. I got emergency X-ray as well as like an emergency MRI or emergency X-ray and a emergency not mammogram, the one with the I keep forgetting the name of it, but it's the procedure that they use, the sonic, but anyway, that'll come to me later. But as we were waiting for the results in the emergency room, the doctor came back and said, you have a tumor the size of a golf ball squeezing up on the left side of your spinal column. Oh, wow. And you essentially have two choices. You can either do nothing about it and the tumor continues to grow and you'll become paralyzed from the chest down, or we can remove it. You'll have to get an artificial vertebrae for your back because it completely ate through your T5 vertebrae, and you'll have to get a titanium cage between your T3 and your T7 to keep everything stable. And I didn't want to do it because I was like, I knew it was going to take me so much longer to recover but I did it, and it basically took me about a year to fully be able to functionally walk again. Though I guess there are moments where I do get like really, really tired. My left leg starts to limp a little bit. But I think for that, I was always working at that level of anxiety. And this was even before we realized that, oh, hey, by the way, this thing is this very rare disease that like only kids in like age of 10 get, but you're going to need to do chemotherapy about this as well. And I was working so much under the pressure of like, I don't know what the future holds with all of this. I feel sick. I feel tired all the time. I feel so drained dealing with everything. I just want this to stop. And I think the biggest thing for me was that I realized I wasn't okay, but in some respect or another, that was actually okay. Like I didn't need to feel as though I needed to put on this air of like, oh yeah, no, I'm doing perfectly fine. And I think just having a moment to just intrinsically look within myself for that, and just kind of being able to deal with a lot of that stuff. And just kind of sometimes you just accept the fact that like, hey, you're just not going to be okay today, but that's fine, because this is going to be something temporary. And I can't say that it's going to magically all disappear, but I can say that it gets better. It always does. It definitely does. Sure, the wound might leave a scar, but it still heals over time. It may not heal in the way that you want it to, or the scar might be bigger than you think, but the wound still heals. And I know recently as of last week, I kind of had one of those depressive spirals that kind of got me into that, where I had to take a step back from my social media for about a week, and just kind of being depressed in my room, asleep, like the blankets over my heads, and just bawling my eyes out. I think one of the very interesting techniques that I used was I almost put my feelings, or like my depressive spiral, on trial, if that makes any sense. So it's almost kind of like my brain logically turned that feeling into like a person, and then I had the other person who is more of like the logical side to pick apart the arguments. And I essentially kind of like took my depression to court. Basically, I like it sounds very weird, and it sounds very strange, and I don't know if this is like an actual tactic or whatever, but like it not only gave that anxious side of my brain a chance to kind of speak and say its piece, but it also gave the other side of my brain a chance to like rebuttal and fully deconstruct those arguments. And obviously, for like the theater of the mind, I had like the jury of the peers, and I had the judge and like the bailiff and everything. It was a very fun time. But just being able to take a second to acknowledge that is happening, but also just taking a second to just let it speak its piece, and then coming in and finding ways to say, it's like, okay, no, that isn't right. No, that's factually inconsistent. It has essentially helped out a lot for me, because that definitely gives it enough time for me to breathe, especially like, again, as I just put it on trial, that part of my brain is telling me something, right? Like how do I put it? It's getting this crazy, and it's getting this hectic for a reason, right? Like emotions, everyone wants to think like emotions are these wild, uncontrollable, eldritch beings that we are all slaves to, but no, emotions are very logical conclusions that your brain kind of gets to. Sure, there are like different ways, and like your brain chemicals might have different transference, but there is still some logic within this chaos. And I'm just fortunate enough that I was able to recognize that and be like, okay, well, I know this is here. Let me take a couple of logical steps backward to see where I can trace, and ultimately see where I can figure out where this spiral is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point or another, it's like, hey, okay, I understand where this is coming from. I can see like logically where this line gets drawn, but then I also have to remember, like, hey, just because that is where those are, that doesn't mean that's the be all end all. And it's a hard uphill battle. And like I said, some days you just kind of have to take a break from everything and just be like, gotta take a second for myself. But I think that is the best way that you can essentially kind of keep yourself strong, because you don't have to stay mentally tough. You don't have to tough it out every single day. Mm-hmm. What you have to do, and what is better for you to do, is stay consistent. Mm-hmm. Whether it is staying consistent with what you're doing for your podcast, or whatever creative outlook that you are having, or just kind of dealing with your mental health. You just have to make sure that you stay consistent with it. But also, you have to give yourself some time and show yourself that you care. And that's ultimately a lot of the time, a lot of the biggest, and I would suppose like the hardest thing to do. Like it took me a very, very long time to learn the lesson of finally loving myself for who I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just allowing yourself, I guess, the grace of, taking a break and acknowledging those feelings and trying to see where they're coming from. So yeah, just allowing yourself some grace to even fail. Even I feel like a lot of us don't do that, including myself.
Yeah, but like I said, it's But in the same vein, you know, can you really blame us for really not wanting to fail? Especially because a lot of the time failure is propped up as this thing that is to be, you know, ridiculed. You know, we've been so ingrained, but we've been so ingrained with everything that it's the idea of like, oh, it's the rule of nature. There are two animals in this world. They're the ones that eat and they're the ones that don't. And that is, for the most part, biologically speaking, or survivally, biologically and by a primitive survival trait, that is true. And unfortunately, because we all live in late stage capitalism, that just kind of equates, hunting equates into money and all that other stuff. But we have a very rare opportunity as human beings where we are able to just be like, nah, I just want to make this thing because it makes me feel good. And even if it does fail, I can say that I made this thing and it still made me feel good. And again, that's just the biggest thing of like, it is okay to fail. I know people are gonna harp on like, oh, well, you didn't do this right, you failed this, and so on and so forth. But sometimes it is okay, and it's probably the better thing for you to do if you do fail. Because just because you fail this one time, that doesn't necessarily mean that opportunity is closed off to you. Maybe you might find another. Maybe if you fail, the door closes, but maybe you might find a back door. Maybe you might find a window. Hell, maybe if somebody who saw you fail really liked your gumption and was like, you know what, kid, I'm gonna open up the door for you. Yeah. And they do. You just never know what life is gonna throw at you, right? Like, especially, I didn't know what I was gonna do with life for the longest time. And then life made me, and then life basically forced me in a bed to be like, hey, you got to think about what you're going to do with the rest of your life now. Cause you may or may, it's like, I know the answer, but you may or may not know what life is going to bring you. You may or not be here, tomorrow. Have fun. And I'm just like, shit. And it just took me, it took me a long time to formulate that and to be like, no, like, you just have to take the time. You have to be okay with the fear of failure. Because again, if you are diligent and if you care and you just learn how to take care of yourself in this space, it's going to be okay.
Yeah. So my last question for you, Ashan, is what is your idea of success? So I ask that because as creators, if we're not getting regular paychecks from a full-time job or making consistent revenue from our art, we're considered failures, or we might consider ourselves failures, like we just talked about. Many of us will put our dreams and projects on the back burner or give them up altogether because this career path can be highly intimidating and competitive. So what is your idea of quote unquote success?
I think, well, actually, no, not I think. I know that my idea of success is just getting to a point where you yourself are happy, or the very least leading a happy and joyous life, doing the things that you want to do. And I don't say this like, oh, like, being successful means you got to be super, super rich, because that's not really the case, right? Like, at the very least for me, I personally don't wish to be a rich person. I mean, like, it would be nice to be like, I can just, buy all the things that I want without really any consequence. But like, in the same vein, it's like, no, I just want enough where I can be comfortable. And more often than not, I want to have enough where I don't have to worry about where my next meal or like my next, the check to pay rent or the utilities is coming. And I can have more time to explore these fun philosophical and artistic beliefs. And like success success for me is just doing something that I love as a passion, and that no matter what happens, even if I still have a bad day at work, you know, if I'm trying to make this and turn this into work, that no matter what, whatever I do for this hobby, it still sparks the same joy and the same spark of fear, I should say, or just kind of like the same nervousness as the first time I did it.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, that is something that I have been definitely struggling with, because I know I would love to be able to meet all of the cool new people in, you know, like the D&D cool kids table. You know, I'd love to go off and do wonderful interviews and like see like the cast of Dimension 20 and Critical Role, but like I'm still broke. I got all of this other shit to deal with. I am still just some black queer dude out of, you know, like the suburbs of downtown, you know, out of the suburbs of the south suburbs of Chicago. You know, like that's just kind of me at the moment, but I don't think it's gonna stay that way long. There are gonna be moments, like I said, where I'm just gonna hate doing all of this, or like it's gonna feel like it's a mistake, but that's just all part of the process and the design. And I even remember I was trying to figure out, because I was talking with my therapist about like, well, you know, if you do have an opportunity to like, you know, if you wanted to leave your job and like go and pursue this, would you? And I know I wasn't sure, so I basically like rolled a D20 to help me figure out, you know, to see like, all right, fate, what do you decide for me? And I would have loved to tell you that I rolled a natural 20 or I rolled a natural 1. But instead, I shit you not, I rolled a 10.
Oh, wow.
And so the 10 was like,
maybe.
And I was just like, so it's definitely like this balancing act to do. But again, if you still enjoy what you're doing, even if you aren't making, you know, making a lot of money, or maybe even making money that like society thinks is enough for you to live, as long as you're still filling your basic human needs and wake up every morning enjoying what you do, that to me is the true measure of success.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to be incredibly rich. You don't need to be incredibly influential, or, you know, maybe that is your term of success. I don't know, man. I am a humble wombat. I'm not a fortune teller or like a psychic or whatever. So I can't tell you, but in a very, very long-winded, because as you can tell, I do enjoy talking, and I guess I supposedly love hearing the sound of my own voice. But in a very, very roundabout way, that is the best way that I personally measure success.
So is there anything else that you wanted to touch on about Agents of Boo, TTRPG podcast that I may have missed?
So I'm thinking, but also there's this really loud noise outside of my apartment. I don't know what. Oh, okay, you know, it's probably a train because it's leaving now. I mean, honestly, the biggest takeaways is not only do we have this like homebrewed Magitech diesel punk world, but also like I've used this opportunity to kind of flex my game design muscles too. So not only is the world homebrew, but also the system that we use is homebrew. Because like I said, I grew up. Well, I didn't originally play D&D until I got into my junior year of high school, because I saw one on the Penny Arcade, like the old school Penny Arcade YouTube, with PAX East, and it was specifically for Acquisitions Incorporated. And I remember I saw it, I fell in love with it. I wanted to learn more about D&D. I had a friend group, super awesome. We used to play D&D in the summer, but then I went off to college, made some super amazing friends, and like learned how to DM through them. And like one of the friends that I made, she's a super awesome DM who's basically kind of taught me a lot of the basics of what I know. And, you know, we played Pathfinder through that. And for this system, I wanted to kind of be a combination between the mechanics of Pathfinder and 3.5. Just to kind of have something a little bit more unique, and just to be like, you know, I could do it because I could. But like, again, even with Agents of Boo, if you're going to do something like that and you want to do something within the realms of TTRPGs and, you know, possibly fantasy, do what you can to make it unique. If it sounds strange, if it sounds weird, just do it, right? Like, you could have a campaign where you all are just conscious plant people, you know, trying to save your planet from like the evil Iron Machine Columbine harvesters or what have you. Or in another vein, you all could be like, but you all could have like a Secret Lives of Pets thing, but like it's during World War II and you're like dealing with you know, like you're fighting off Hitler and like his occult army or whatever. If you have an idea, no matter how dumb or how stupid or how out there it's going to seem on paper, try it out, because chances are it's going to look a little bit different from when you actually put it into practice versus on paper. Mm-hmm. And there are billions of people that exist right now on the third rock from the sun, this little blue and green marble that we call Earth. Somebody's going to listen to you. If it's not going to be now, it'll probably be sometime in the future. Mm-hmm. And the fun thing about that is, if somebody listens to that and they really dig it, that's also something awesome, because that plants another seed of inspiration, and it just kind of helps that creativity grow.
Yeah. Well, that's a great note to end on. This was a really great interview.
Thank you. Like I said, I appreciate you letting us on, and I've just been kind of thinking about this stuff for a while. So.
All right. Well, again, I want to thank the showrunner and dungeon master of the Tales of Adventure Agents of Boo TTRPG podcast, Ashawn Jackson, aka Dapper Wombat, for joining us here today. All of Ashawn's social will be listed in this episode's details for those who are interested in learning more about the podcast, or maybe want to listen to it when it is it already out now, or is it coming out?
Yes, it is. You can always find us. We are on Spotify. We are on Pocket Cast. We are not on Apple Music yet, as of this recording, or I guess as of this episode, we are not on there yet. We are on a good couple of spots. So if you just type in Agents of Boo, you'll find us. Don't worry, you'll find us. And if not, hey, you can always look us up on our Twitter of @Agents of Boo. That is @agents_of_boo. Come see how we do. I know, right?
Well, again, I'm KS Garner, and you've been listening to the Solo Nerdbird podcast. Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.